using unconventional forms, risky subject matter, and avant-garde strategies. Artists have participated in public debate for centuries. The advent of cheap, easily reproduced images in 20th century advertising lent to artists making interventions using graphic design and postering. On this edition of Art Now, we'll look at the work of Heather Ault.
Welcome to Art Now. I'm Sarah Ross, your host, and today we're with Heather Ault, a graphic design artist and a visual artist. Hi, Heather.
Hi, how's it going, Sarah?
Good. Heather, let's just start by asking a little bit of a biography. Where were you born and when did you move to Urbana?
Well, I was born in 1972 in Grosse Pointe Park, Michigan, and I went to art school there at the Center for Creative Studies in downtown Detroit. Then I moved to California, was there for 10 years, and in looking at graduate schools, I came to Champaign-Urbana because of Leslie Regan, a historian who teaches here, and she's one of the kind of lead historians on the history of abortion. So I came here to study with her and to be part of the School of Art and Design.
What kind of ideas best describe your work?
I really focus on women's rights, highly visual and graphic images and symbols that are changing narratives and introducing new ideas, especially history, into the women's rights and reproductive choice movements.
Let's start by talking about a large project that you've been working on for a while called 4,000 Years of Choice. How did that get started, and maybe that can help unpack some of the ideas of changing narratives that you're talking about?
Mm-hmm. Well, when I was living in California, I had several different experiences working with pro-choice organizations, NARAL, the National Abortion Rights Action League, and the Women's Choice Clinic, based in Oakland, California. And I really started to realize that there was kind of a missing narrative within the reproductive choice movement. The history that I've always heard was the back alley abortions, the feminist movement, kind of reclaiming the right to an abortion, and the fight for Roe v. Wade. And ever since then, we've been struggling and fighting to defend this right. I ran across an interesting book by a woman named Linda Gordon called Every Woman, Every Choice. And she basically described the folklore of abortion and contraception going back to ancient times. She chronicled ancient Egyptian women using spermicides and contraception and different abortion techniques all through ancient Greece and Rome, throughout all of the Middle Ages. And it was just a completely new way to think about reproductive rights, something that I had never encountered before ever in any of the activism that I had done. And I realized there were just incredible images and symbols that really represented all of these ancient practices, and that these could be symbols that would be very healing and very grounding and very empowering for women to know about and to visualize when they think about reproductive choice.
One of the questions I have, as we get to the images, we'll start to see how these are very graphic images, and they have and can be used by not only the art world or the space of galleries, but in more public or even institutional or pedagogical spaces. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering how this history that you're describing what kinds of conversations have come out of that in places like clinics or other kinds of educational spaces that you've encountered? Because that's an interesting way to look at it, this really long view as opposed to the last 30 years view.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, when I originally started my work, I was really designing it kind of in as a response to the anti-choice or pro-life movement. And I became very interested in the kind of narratives and stories they were telling. And the more I've worked as an artist and done research and really looked at the images, the history, the language, and the spaces in which the pro-choice movement operates, I became more critical and have built an analysis around why I think the existing narrative for women's reproductive rights is really not the best one that we can use to tell our story. So as an artist, in terms of kind of my audience, this is a question that all artists face, is where do we put our work? Who is our audience? And essentially what kind of dialogue are we trying to kind of invoke around our work? And I really came to realize that the clinics themselves and clinic spaces are really my ideal audience, kind of my gallery basically, so that whereas some artists focus on the physical gallery, I've become very interested in focusing on the physical space of a clinic and how it functions within the community, and how clinics can really become kind of the headquarters or the point of origin for some of the work that I'm doing in basically a historical narrative.
Let's talk about the first poster that you developed, and it sort of has a little bit of a different main bold word. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that and how that got you started on the rest of the posters?
Mm-hmm. Well, when I started my poster series, I designed a series of 12, and I essentially took historical symbols and created visual graphic icons out of them, and then produced posters that really were focused in the history. So each poster, such as the sponge or the Malthusian appliance or the pill, just focuses on the historical narrative. Now, one thing a lot of people would ask me, which I found very interesting, was, are you for abortion or against abortion? It wasn't necessarily clear to some folks which side of the argument I was on. Mm-hmm. And I found that really interesting because to me, the signs or the posters felt very much like they were celebrating this history more so than providing a critique of it.
And so that got you started on the second set of posters, is this true?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so can you talk about how you design these and how you choose the language that goes on them and matching those with images?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So around this time that I was working on these posters, I went to Washington, D.C. for Obama's inauguration, and I kept encountering the word hope, which mm-hmm. was his word that he used to win the campaign. And so I thought more and more about how language and words, and just very simple words, mean so much to us as human beings, and how it's so easy to kind of rally around a very simple message. So, and then kind of thinking more about how the anti-choice, pro-life movement kind of tells their story. It's a very empowering and positive story about prayer and about connection to God and celebrating religion and spirituality. So I decided to incorporate into my work positive words and include that with the history and the symbols. So here are just some of the posters that are part of the series. So each of them has a word such as cherish, thanks, or thank, feel, praise, maintain, treasure, recover. Mm-hmm. And these, in combination with the images and the history, I think really tells a story more than I was with my first series of reproductive choice as an empowering, a positive, and a very human act that is something that we can feel good about celebrating.
And the images that you're choosing, are they all plant-based? And does the plant have something to do with the sort of technology, if you will, of mm-hmm. the time?
Absolutely. So, for example, this one is about birthwort. So, birthwort is an herb that has been used for literally thousands of years and has been present in ancient medical texts and herbal guides and things like that from the Middle Ages. Some of these are more about technology, such as the walrus ribs, which were used by Eskimo tribes that were using them as surgical devices to perform abortions. Sometimes I'm featuring some of the women from the movement, such as Pat McGinnis, who in the late 1950s in San Francisco was one of the first feminist activists to really be out on the streets, handing out information to women about where to find abortion services at that time because it was illegal. The menstrual extractor is also a feminist device that was designed during the time that abortion was illegal as kind of a home, more of a do-it-yourself abortion method. Fumigation pots, where women would fumigate their vaginas to, basically kill the sperm as like a spermicide, have been around for thousands of years. So I find all of these techniques so incredibly fascinating because they're just not things that we think of when we think of reproductive choice, and again, it really tells the larger narrative that this is something that women have really been engaged in for thousands of years.
It also seems to point to a point in time when women were in more control of their bodies in many ways, or possibly not just women, but humans, in the sense that there wasn't a medical industry that really was very high tech, that more distance ourselves from the kinds of not just choices, but the kinds of processes that we're using to remedy problems, whether that's sickness or unwanted pregnancies. So the one thing I want to address in this project is why use posters? Why not use something more that are more considered formal, like paintings or even framed posters? These posters are in a very sort of rough format mounted on chipboard, and that's a very specific aesthetic and design decision. Why do that?
I think because I am very interested in making work that's mass producible, rather than single objects that take me as the artist, many, many hours to produce and are perhaps like inaccessible to just regular folks who want to have beautiful images in their home, at their workplace, at their clinic, or whatnot. I would be thrilled if the images could just be produced in the numbers of thousands and distributed all over the world, or millions rather. There's other kinds of formats that I've used. One in particular is wallpaper as another kind of way to imagine how we could display history within our everyday lives, within the common spaces, such as our homes, our kitchens, our bathrooms, our bedrooms. So behind me here is a wallpaper which is based on the design of the menstrual extractor. And in creating this body of work, there are a number of other wallpaper designs as well. In theory, there could be one for every single historical image that I've come up with. But this is the birthwort design. This is silphium. This is an ancient plant that was incredibly popular about 2,000 years ago, and it was over-harvested because so many people wanted this incredible plant that basically would guarantee you're not going to become pregnant, that it's no longer available to us at all. The sponge. This is the neem plant, and the menstrual extractor, as well as the condom design. And in creating these wallpaper images, I've thought a lot about how, again, our interior spaces are the kind of spaces that we want to, celebrate. We want them to be beautiful. We want objects and colors and patterns and things in our lives that mean that mean a lot to us, to our families, to our own life stories. So people spend millions of dollars every year painting and decorating and making their spaces so beautiful. So similar to the way that someone might go to a paint store and pick out colors, think about how they would beautify their homes. I've created these wallpapers with the idea that you could simply go to a paint store, pick up a card for the Silphium design, see some of the colors, which are Woolly Warmth, African Sun Glow, or Fantastic Fennel, all kind of having to do with this particular history. Read about the history and, be kind of empowered as a feminist interior designer and, put these patterns into your homes.
How are these distributed at this point? So you said that the posters were distributed in clinics and other kinds of social spaces, and then that's the sort of gallery.
Right.
What is a gallery for something like this at this point?
Well, I'm still working on that, actually, kind of imagining how the wallpaper could really be mass distributed or made available in stores around the country. For now, it's been displayed in 2 different galleries in group exhibitions. And the wallpaper was produced by a wallpaper company in LA. It's fairly expensive to produce such a small run of specialty wallpaper, but I've had several clinics say, "Oh my gosh, we would love to have this in our clinic. That this would just be so much fun to actually put in the space that we work."
And are these objects distributable objects, or did in the gallery space, or do they sort of stay there, or can people? There's a habit of taking these and sticking them on your wall for a couple weeks to see if you like it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the idea. These cards have been available at the shows that I've had the wallpaper displayed in, with the idea that they could be these little take-home objects that people could take home either from a gallery or from different kinds of specialty stores or artist spaces and things like that.
So the last project that we wanted to look at describes not the interior space of the home, but the exterior space of clinics themselves. And so this is in a book format. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so as I continue to think about clinics as places for artist projects, I thought more and more about the exterior of clinics and how for regular people in their community, that's the space they drive by, walk by, and look at, perhaps every day. Maybe they live across the street or, work near a clinic, and we don't have access to the interior. We can't see beautiful images inside or wallpaper on their walls or the kind of healthy and supportive and empowering spaces that clinics provide as soon as you walk through the door. What we're left with is really seeing the exterior. So I thought, first of all, it would be really fascinating to just literally drive all around the country and photograph and look at clinics and then meet them and talk to them and look at how the spaces actually is set up. Talk to them about what kind of protests that are happening in front of the clinic and how art could kind of be used to maybe change that dynamic. However, it's kind of ambitious to imagine driving around the country looking at thousands of clinics. So instead, I went through Google Earth or the Google Street View to actually look at clinics in that format and kind of tour around clinics virtually. These artist books are basically books that chronicle what the kind of clinics that are in each state. There was a few things I really came to realize. First of all, some clinics just have, or some states just have a few clinics, 1 or 2 or 3 clinics, or 8 clinics in Nevada, 10 in Indiana, only 3 here in Kansas. Some states have a lot, 127 in California. So just by kind of looking at the thickness of each of these books, it's we can appreciate the kind of access that women actually have. So, for example, these books show from the Google Street View what clinics actually look like, and and one thing I began to realize is how clinics are really blending into the background of their environment. It's very infrequent that a clinic really puts out a big sign and says, you know, we do abortions or we do family planning. More often they're just kind of in a just a more generic business district, maybe not even in the best part of town, because it's so difficult often for abortion providers to rent space, in kind of the medical center. So they're really left with.
So is this a visual
cheaper rent?
Is this a visual strategy for clinics in their own right, as artists have a visual strategy often of becoming visible or making what's invisible visible? Is this a strategy for clinics to become invisible for their own sustainability?
That's what I've come to find, and I've talked with different abortion providers and clinic directors who've described how they've really just kind of left the outside to just kind of, blend in, again, for their own safety, for their own protection, so that they get the least number of protesters perhaps in front of the clinic. But unfortunately, the number of protesters continues to increase every year through some of the kind of deliberate anti-choice organizations who are really looking at occupying that clinic space. So as an artist, the way that this clinic photography visualization project really ultimately has the goal of developing a bigger campaign strategy around how do we celebrate clinics. These signs here are really about bringing these positive messages, bringing history, and bringing the kind of messages that we want to the clinic space, and just say, if we're here to protect and save this clinic, we're going to celebrate it, honor it, respect it, and bring it as much love as we absolutely can. So there's a lot of ways to kind of look at how clinics could function as a resource for a pro-choice message that's really positive and empowering.
I know at times I've heard you talk about the interesting sort of performance that happens between people who are on the outside and people who are on the inside of clinics, and then these sort of people in between who are going to get a regular checkup. And so I was wondering how you could imagine these kinds of images working for any of those groups.
Right. Well, I do think the clinic is like a stage, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I have described the performative nature of all of the kind of actors, the characters that show up to this space every day. There's, the staff and patients who are coming in and out of the clinic, often risking their lives every day doing this. There's just regular passersby, and then there's people who are there to protest the clinic and hopefully dissuade women from going inside, or with the ultimate goal of shutting down a clinic. I think that the role of positive messages and empowering words is, there's an incredible amount of potential in just changing this narrative, so often the kind of messages that we see at clinics by pro-choice supporters are about defending clinics, and they're really rooted in messages such as, stop the violence against women, or keep your rosaries off my ovaries, or things like that, which are really fun feminist slogans, but they don't go very far in terms of really making the space feel very positive and loved and celebrated. So I think it would be very hard for someone to disagree with the positive message that would be brought to a clinic, and because they're non-confrontational, or even historical images such as a large sponge, or Emma Goldman, or an onion, or a beautiful herb or plant. like these are images that aren't going to necessarily provoke the other side, and hopefully ultimately work toward just making women feel really empowered and rooted in history and their choices for being there.
So the last question that I have really brings to the fore other histories, art histories in particular, that you look to continue your own practice or to inspire your own practice.
Josh McPhee's People's History Project definitely has been a huge inspiration for me. And the kind of work that he's doing with poster and graphic artists and activists around the world. Fabiana Rodriguez as well as someone who I've always really admired and just enjoy the way that she brings her own politics, her own life experience, and feminism together in beautiful images that describe the kind of social injustices that she cares about and wants to change, and does so in a way that really empowers and inspires people.
Our guest has been Heather Ault. Her work has been on display at the Champaign County Planned Parenthood during Condom Week, and you can find her work at 4000yearsforchoice.com and heatherault.org. This program showcases artists in our community and encourages you to make your own art now.